About what?
I didn't do research.
What do
I
I
figured
think
you
about
would
it?
know the history of stuff.
Oh yeah, yeah, that's good, that's good. Did you make it or? Did you make the flyer?
I'm not really sure.
Doesn't know much about it.
You could probably put it on the floor over there if you want to have a seat.
I'm sure the thing is you've been around Occupy so long that even if you weren't intentionally studying, you were getting it by osmosis.
What about another chair?
Anyway, we're here at Global Exchange. This is Freeman Sullivan, your intrepid live streamer. We're getting ready to start Occupy Forum.
You know, you're so used to doing it, you just turn them out. Yeah, probably.
Well, of course.
Beyond, oh, this happened. 90% cure rates with no side effects in 80.
So,
It's like coming from like a year of this horrible side effect treatment they wanted to happen. But I had 6 months of the thing instead of 12. But now they can get off 1,000 bucks. So it's basically 100 grams. The liver transplant is like so it's cheap. Liver transplant. Most people have super sensitive. It's like obviously now this comes out to everyone. A lot of people have zero prisons or on Medicare and Medicaid.
You know, I was looking online the other day for something. Oh, I was looking up Jerry.
Jerry Vander.
Yeah, Jerry Vander. For something else, like for his email or something like that. Because we email all the time. I know him as a friend. And I see that person's live, the live stream of it. And I'm like, I mean, not every single one, but out of the like 80 that we've done so far,
So we're all working together, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I shouldn't thank you. It's like, I'm glad you did. I'm glad you did it.
Yeah, well, that's part of what I do, And they're all up on YouTube. Everything I do is on YouTube. And you can use anything you want. Sometimes video quality is not always the best, but it's not because of the camera. It's because of the bandwidth where I'm at, cell phone system. But I'm going to get a good one now, so I'll drop into it. I just bought this camera for this phone I had to when I was on YouTube. Yeah, it's a phone.
Oh, God, Sons of Anarchy. That show is so co-opted all the classical anarchist symbols and slogans. Yeah, it says like,
Are we going in after? Are we going in after?
no gods, no masters. I don't watch it. I saw a display out loud in Times Square in New York, and I learned
They're really fun.
the show about Thunder Gang. It's got to be
So we're about ready to get started for those of you just joining us. We're here at Occupy Forum at Global Exchange. If you're in San Francisco, do drop in. It's at 16th and Mission Street. It's the entrance right next to the McDonald's. And tonight, Occupy Forum presents Anarchism with Ramsey, Kanaan, Joey Cain, and Liz Highleyman. Three noted people in the anarchist community here in San Francisco. So these forums happen every Monday, 6 p.m. So you can check at the occupysf.org website for more information. Tonight we're going to be talking about anarchism, past, present, and future. So we'll be starting here in just a couple of minutes. All right, Be Withering. Thanks for joining us. And we'll be getting started in just a few seconds. Like everything, it's usually late.
No. Me neither, but when I saw that display in Times Square, I was like, yeah, and it also said no gods, no masters.
And they're not.
Yeah.
And they don't go to meetings.
Normally I
Good, how are you?
Everybody gets a chance to. Oh, now we're going. That's too bad.
If you guys would have just excused me for just a second. Just about.
1 second, Steve. Let him in.
Oh, go ahead. It's fine.
You good?
Yeah, I'm going to have to plug it in anyway.
All right, go for it.
Hey, pretty good.
Okay, I want to thank everybody for coming tonight. This San Francisco Occupy Forum is going on almost 2 years. Every Monday night we have different programs and great speakers. Thanks to a lot of regular people here, and like Ruthie here is Ruthie Sackheim, she's organizes a lot of these talks. And I want to thank her, and I want to thank Mitchell Halberstadt back there for making flyers. Thank you. I did this. I did a program on anarchism. Hi, Gene. I did a program on anarchism about 5 years ago in Berkeley at La Pina Cultural Center. We had about 50 people, and a lot of people, as well as myself, didn't have a broad understanding of anarchism. But at the end of the evening, a lot of people came up to me and said, boy, they learned a lot and they were a lot more knowledgeable. Because a lot of us know kind of just a few things about anarchism, but it's a deep subject. And with the speakers we have tonight, I think we're going to leave a lot more knowledgeable. We've got Ramsey Kanaan, and he was the founder of AK Press, co-founder of PM Press, and co-founder of the Anarchist Book Fair, which I'm sure many of you go to. That's Ramsey right here. Ramsey actually has, you'll see him at a lot of events with his selling his books. And he's married to Sasha Lilly at KPFA. And is always out there in the front lines, as well as Joey Cain. Joey Cain is co-founder of the Anarchist Book Fair as well, with Ramsey. And he's a prominent member of Bound Together Books in The Hague, Anarchist bookstore, and he's on the board of directors of the LGBT Pride Celebration. And Joey's has always been on the front lines as well. Liz, I just met Liz actually. And she was highly recommended to me by a couple of anarchist people and others. She's a journalist, historian, and she'll tell you more about herself. But anyway, they're going to talk each for maybe 20 minutes or so, and then we're going to open it up for questions and answers. We should be here a while. Thanks for coming.
All right, welcome.
So I got elected, even if we don't believe in elections, to sort of kick this off, and I guess from what I understand, my guess is there are many people sitting in this room who know as much about anarchism as the three of us do. I know I've seen a lot of you around working in the community and organizing for many, many years, if not decades. So I think we're going to keep our portion pretty short and then kind of move towards having a roundtable or a discussion. I wanted to just sort of cover some of what I consider, and I think anarchist writers have considered kind of basic tenets of anarchism. Along with it generally being anti-statist, having a critique of the state as one of the roots of all evil, There's some basic principles, some basic ideas that that I think a lot of us share. There is a tradition which says anarchism is actually the way humans naturally interact with each other, and that it takes the state and religion and other structures to actually inhibit the natural anarchism of humans. And under that, there's a few ideas, like the idea of spontaneous action. Anarchism has, not always to its credit, but has always strongly celebrated or recognized the importance of spontaneous organization as opposed to overly labored, analytical, truncated, dinosaurian forms of action. Along with spontaneous action, the idea of direct action, that people organize to directly act upon a problem or create a situation that they want without having to go and petition the state, without having to go through the hierarchy of religion, that people through direct action can affect their own lives and can affect the world around them. There's a great place given to the idea of decentralization as a general concept, that a decentralized form of social organization and political organization is a generally healthier form of organization as opposed to an overly centralized sense of that. There's probably a few other ones that I'm forgetting, but for me those were the three that, just sitting here not knowing what we were supposed to talk about, I was able to pull out of my head. I think that a lot of, certainly the activities of Occupy, I mean, I'm assuming a lot of the folks here came out of working with Occupy and stuff. I mean, that was probably one of the greatest recent large manifestation of anarchist ideas and principles in action, which is why I assume you folks know as much about it as I do at this point. In terms of its history, you know, anarchism sort of came out of the Enlightenment, out of the idea of rational human thought being able to work in the world. And it was generally, and Ramsey might be better on this than I am, it had at heart a humanist critique. That it is not like, you know, it's not God. Although there is a whole tradition that says a lot of anarchism did come out of anti-Dominion Christian movements, especially here in the United States. But without having to get, if people are interested in the history, come by our bookstore and I can give you a book on the history, because it's a long and varied history, especially here in the United States. Generally, it's thought that there's two major schools of anarchism. There's sort of the anarcho-communist, anarcho-communalists, and the anarcho-individualists. Anarcho-individualists see the individual as the great soul organizer. The collectivist communalists see the need and the usefulness of communal action. I tend to think if you're an anarchist, both things make sense. Anarcho-individualists tend to be libertarian, quite honestly. The Libertarian Party is an excellent example of anarcho-individualism. The anarchists who organized in Spain in the 30s during the Spanish Revolution tended to be collectivist communalists and organized society as a communal effort. I can't quite see how you can have one without the other, although the individualists would argue that you can. I think I'm going to, starting with that, just pass it around and see if there's anything that Ramsey or Liz would like to add about sort of basic tenets of anarchism.
I would just
Could
add.
I say one thing?
Sure.
That is that I don't thank you so much. But I'm not sure all of us have a deep understanding of anarchism as you might think.
Oh.
Some people do. I think a lot of us are students and we know just a little bit about it.
Oh, okay.
Probably a wide range of knowledge.
Of
in this
knowledge,
room.
got it.
Right.
Okay.
What I would add to what Joey said is I think another basic tenet is sort of anti-authoritarianism, which would mean not only opposition to the state, but to any other sort of structure, be it, you know, a corporate hierarchy, a religion like Joey mentioned, or I guess you could think of any number of authoritarian hierarchies that impose their will by force or otherwise on people. And I think anarchists tend to oppose all of those. I think what was really great about Occupy and whatever it's still, to the extent that it's still percolating out there in the population, is that it's the ideas that are the sort of 99% idea, problematic though it sometimes is something that everybody on the street gets. Everybody kind of feels that, you know, the large majority should not be under the thumb of a tiny minority. And you know, well, a lot of political philosophies over the years and activists have sort of had, you know, a rarefied theory, be it, you know, communism or libertarianism or whatever, that's sort of, nobody really agrees with, you know, it's kind of like a obscure thing. I think anarchism is something that everybody can kind of viscerally understand, you know, nobody likes being under the thumb of somebody else. And I think there's a lot of, you know, you'll hear people joke about like, oh, an anarchist organization, ha ha, you know, anarchists don't organize, but I think, you know, that's a misnomer. I mean, anarchists organize a lot and have in history, and it's not, I would say, not organization that anybody is opposed to, or even certain kinds of authority, like the authority of somebody who, you know, the architect building the house. Yes, I want the architect to direct that project. I want the surgeon to direct the project of doing surgery, and that kind of, you know, that's a form of authority, which I don't think, you know, I don't think anybody is opposed to that. I don't think anybody's opposed to organization or organizations, but that's a misnomer you often hear, so.
There are several things going on with anarchism, and if anarchism is more than just an idea, or let me rephrase that. One of the attractive things to me about anarchism is it's more than just an idea. It's more than just a philosophy. Obviously, ideas matter for all kinds of reasons, but equally, if it remains in the realm of just being an idea, it's nice to dream and fantasize and contemplate, but at a certain point we have to exist in this world, and ultimately, presumably, everyone in this room wants to shape that world to make it a better place for more than just us. One of the things that attracted me to anarchism is, as I say, it's what political commentators would call a praxis. It's the theory and the practice. And that is kind of crucial when you think of most political ideas. They're named after the great thinker, leader, guru, whatever. Marxism. Of course, Marx was the first one to say the problem with Marxism is the Marxists. And many would claim that the problem with anarchism is the anarchists. Nevertheless, one of the things that differentiates, say, anarchism from Marxism is it's not a particular dogma or set of ideas or a particular philosophy. It is a set of ideas and philosophies which are put into practice, and through practice, of course, they change, they transmute, they get added to, they get taken away. So anarchism is as much a process as it is a set of ideas. Nevertheless, because life is complicated and messy, and because ideas matter and words are important, anarchism means something. Anarchism doesn't just mean a complicated set of things which people do, whatever. Anarchism means a particular set of complicated things that people do, because otherwise it would not be anarchism, it would be something else. So hence, we can define anarchism as a particular set of practices and ideas. Liz and Joey have mentioned several of them. I think the key is, as Liz was saying, it's a form of social and economic organisation. If we are to go beyond it being individualists, stuff gets done because we do it in concert with others, or in opposition to others, in conflict with others. Nevertheless, it is a collective process. So anarchism is a set of ideas of how to understand the world, and a set of collective processes of how to interact with that world and change it. I can get into even more arcane definitions, but then the problems start. Anarchism became more than an idea at the same time that Marxism became more than an idea, in the sense it was born in the kind of great 19th century upheavals when the working class, as they became known, started to struggle against capitalism. So insofar as that's where anarchism came from, and it's come from, anarchism is part of the broader working class movements, and by that logic is part of the left, is where it came from. Again, I would argue that's still the basis of it, but whatever. As Joey was saying, anarchism, because it is opposed to the state and to most institutions, because it's opposed to taking power and exercising power as such, it has tended to be not only attacked by all kinds of power structures, understandably, because it's against them, but it tends to therefore be, historically speaking, and including up to the present day, both more fleeting, because it's attacked, it's ignored, it's eradicated, whatever, but also because lots of stuff which anarchists do is not perceived by most people to be anarchists, or anarchism in action. So as Joey said, the Occupy movement. Ironically, the Occupy movement was literally started by 3 anarchists. Who were the 3 people that got together in Zuccotti Park. And there was actually another demonstration happening at the same time in Zuccotti Park, which was your typical kind of lefty podium speaker, great men and women from particular political sects. And they said, fuck this, we'll go to the other side of the park and we'll have an assembly. They said this because anarchism comes out of a particular traditional set of practices, and these 3 folks, one of whom is David Graeber, who you may have heard of, I'm sure you haven't heard of the other 2, Sabu Kosu, and I forget the third, much to my shame, where they kind of cut their teeth, so to speak, in the anti-globalization movement, which again you'll be familiar with, kind of what came out of Seattle. Again, like most things in history, Seattle didn't come out of nowhere. Seattle came out of years and years of organizing, largely by anarchists, who were organizing a group called the Direct Action Network, who started organizing around the conventions, the Democratic National Convention, etc., which kind of culminated in Seattle. Okay, which is a long way of saying that anarchists are doing all kinds of things and acting in all sorts of ways which are not typically perceived by anyone as anarchist organizations or practices. And again, we could go back and forward and extrapolate all kinds of other examples. The 3 of us here have been involved in all kinds of anarchist organizing in terms of doing specifically anarchist activities as anarchists, book fairs, whatever. Equally, you've been involved in all kinds of organizing and doing stuff which is not explicitly anarchist, or indeed maybe on the face of it very un-anarchist. It might be quote-reformist activities. But again, we have brought our anarchist sensibilities, our anarchist ways of organizing, and that kind of thing to those stuff. That stuff that's very interviewed. To those projects that we've been involved in and around. And again, maybe we should, one way of discussing would be those kind of projects and problems, tensions, commonalities or not, and doing that kind of stuff. We could talk all night about Occupy, for instance.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, in terms of both quote-unquote explicitly anarchist projects and or non-anarchist projects, I know I actually almost know when I became an anarchist. Because I'm from Buffalo, New York, very early on, very working class town. I had a major in the late 60s, early 70s, very political town, major student, it was called the Berkeley of the East. I came out around the time I was 15 or 16 and got involved with the Gay Liberation Front at the university. I was a high school student, I skipped school, I would hang out at the university. And there was a Gay Liberation Front group there, and it was fairly Marxist, and I was reading a lot of Marx, and I was involved with a left authoritarian party. But the gay organization was meeting at, of all places, a college at the university called Tolstoy College. And it was an anarchist college. One of the things the students in '68 had demanded was more community relevance in the curriculum at the university and more engagement with the community, largely African American, largely poor, that were surrounding the university. And they set up this system of colleges. It's actually where women's studies came from, American studies. A lot of these fields actually developed out of things like this that happened at universities all over the United States. So we were the Gay Liberation Front group I was meeting at the Anarchist College, and I was like, oh, anarchism, oh, of course, well, yeah, shopkeepers. And it did, however, I met several of the people who were involved in it and found them really intelligent, found them interesting, found them entertaining. And I started to read works on anarchism, the kind of basic, Emma Goldman and Alexander Berkman, who were about all you could really get right around that time. Dover published that. And it was through reading anarchist stuff and arguing with my Marxist comrades about certain issues, especially about what do you do with people who don't agree with you. Well, at that time it was, you shoot them. And I somehow, I don't know if it's residual, Catholic, whatever, upbringing, but I thought, I think there's another way that you can deal with people besides shooting them. And it was really a process of how, do you change people? How do you organize people? And I consciously decided that I was an anarchist and became involved with this anarchist college, explicitly anarchist college. We taught classes on anarchism. That's how I learned about the Spanish Revolution. It's how I learned about the Kanaan. It's how I learned about the history of anarchism. So that was a specifically anarchist project. When I got out here to San Francisco, I eventually became involved with Bound Together Bookstore, which did not start out as a specifically anarchist project. It was started in the mid-'70s by people who were countercultural. They were very big supporters of sort of the do-it-yourself ideas that were going on then. It was before it was called DIY. And the store stocked that stuff, but by about '83, when we were moving from one side of the Panhandle up to Haight Street, all of us in the collective suddenly realized that we intellectually and as activists identified ourselves as anarchists. So we decided to add anarchist collectivist bookstore to the title. And I guess it's sort of, I believe an important thing is to make educational propaganda materials available, and that you can change people's mind through education, and you can change people's minds by having this material available for people to read and look at. And that's been a major commitment. The anarchist book fair grew out of that. Ramsey was actually really the one who sort of pushed it because they were happening over in England, right? And it was the 20th anniversary of Bound Together Bookstore. And we decided to do a book fair in celebration of the 20th anniversary. And it was wildly successful, and our bookstore organized it for about 17 years. We're no longer involved in organizing it. We all got burnt out, honestly. And other folks have taken it up. It's now over in the East Bay. It's happening over there. So that is what explicitly anarchist propaganda activity. However, I've been involved in a lot of the stuff in the modern LGBT movement since the 70s. And besides the radical fairies, which I was very involved in, but that's a whole long other story, probably the most seemingly weird thing that I could get involved in was the San Francisco LGBT Pride Celebration Committee. And throughout its history, that event has always had this tension between, is it a celebration or is it a political action? And I always felt it was both. That you can have a party that is also political and has a political goal, and it doesn't mean it's a Republican or a Democratic party, but it's a celebration, a community celebration. And I joined the board, specifically with the intention of sort of repoliticizing the event, because it was going through one of those periods where it was like, so-so. And found the other people on the board incredibly receptive to the ideas that I brought. At the time, anarchists also love fetishizing around how we actually conduct our meetings. Sometimes I think, to detriment, but usually it's good. And at that time, consensus, which I know Occupy is very big about, was and still is an important idea of putting your philosophy into practice. So I introduced the idea of the board making decisions by consensus, and after people were like confused, what does it mean? I was able to identify for them that, look, at most of the decisions we've made, actually, we all agree with. We have been talking with each other, we still voted, but we, very rarely had it where there was a sizable block of people who didn't agree with what went on. And so we actually set it up so that consensus, we call it modified consensus, as everybody's probably familiar with, we created a modified form of consensus. A political element was reintroduced into it. We had to redress the balance between the big party and also having a political meeting. Meaning, at the time I was on the board, there was also all this gay marriage stuff going on, which I am not a fan of. But it is what the community was expressing, at least a certain element of the community. That helped repoliticize, give it some, even if it's reformist politics, it reintroduced some element of politics into the event. I recently have gotten back on the board because of stuff surrounding the Chelsea Manning issues that went down a year ago. Again, as an anarchist and working with something like Pride, I see it's a cycle. It'll move away from being more politically explicit, and then it needs to be moved back, and then there'll be a tension. It's never going to be perfect. But that, for me, is an example of how I've tried to take my deeply held anarchist ideas and beliefs and actions and work in a larger social environment. I was hugely influenced by Paul Goodman, who was, great, I think one of the great American thinkers and writers in the 60s, well, actually started in the 40s, but certainly in the 60s. And he explicitly said, the society I live in is mine. I'm not going to be forced into some countercultural environment. I am going to claim articles for the New York Times. I'm going to claim the larger world and not be shunted aside. And I think that's what Occupy does. There's always a tension between, do we create our own little countercultural world, or do we engage and take over in the larger world? I tend to be in favor of taking over. Although I'm an anarchist and I don't believe in power. I do believe in changing, and changing usually means some form of convincing and taking over.
Okay, I'll just riff on that a little. Well, I agree with Ramsey's sort of take on the historical origins of anarchism as an explicit philosophy. I think a lot of leftists today spend too much time focusing on sort of the boss versus employee dynamic, or now, especially in San Francisco, the sort of landlord versus tenant dynamic. And I think people would be more happy the world would be a better place if all of us could be none of the above. And how do we get from there to here, I think is the question. I think the idea of worker-owned businesses are great, collectives, land trust, all those things that allow people to, the people most involved, to control their lives, their work, their homes, and, you know, sort of build their communities are great, but how does that scale to a larger, you know, even citywide, not to mention, you know, an entity as large as the US where people don't, not even anything resembling a consensus about, you know, common politics. And the area I work most in, I'm a medical writer and I work most in healthcare, and so that's kind of been where a lot of my thinking has been about where can anarchist politics come into play. I went, after Hurricane Katrina, I went and worked, or first I started as a street medic with, in Seattle in fact, at the WTO protest, and did that for a while. We started a group here called the Bay Area Radical Health Collective. And a number of us went to New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina and were part of a group that started a clinic there called the Common Ground Clinic, which, you know, I think we went thinking we're going to patch people up and, you know, things of that nature. But mostly what people needed was to have, you know, their blood pressure medication refilled. You know, and how do we, as activists that are kind of used to working on a do-it-yourself, small scale, deal with the infrastructure that needs to be behind large-scale healthcare provision. And I think, you know, there's certainly, that clinic did grow quite large. It was able to do, you know, surgery and all the major medical procedures working in concert with the local hospitals, which had kind of been trashed, and we're glad to have, you know, other people working with them. But normally a lot of that comes under not necessarily the state per se, but the sort of the capitalist system. And one thing I've thought a lot about lately is how do we do things like drug development? I mean, there are people that think, you know, after the revolution, everybody will be healthy and they'll be able to take herbs and that'll be great. But some of us are skeptical. And, you know, right now the thing I write about a lot is hepatitis C, and they've just developed some fabulous drugs which are, you know, about 100% effective in 12 months, or 12 weeks rather. Cures almost everybody with barely any side effects. It's $1,000 a pill. And what do you do about this? You know, it's like, clearly there's something about the process of, you know, the competitive process that compelled the work that went into making these things happen, but they're not going to be available for a very large portion of people, especially because hepatitis C, you know, affects a lot of poor people, a lot of older people, a lot of prisoners, so it's, a lot of it is publicly funded. And the issue now is, you know, with these both private insurers and public funders saying, you know, this is going to double our pharmaceutical budget. We don't have it. What are we going to do? Who are we going to treat? And is there a way we could do that on a, you know, on a communal scale? I think most scientists that are doing the actual drug development are not necessarily motivated by making as much money as possible. They want to do something, maybe they want a Nobel Prize, but they also want to help humanity. And it's their CEO that's getting however many millions of dollars. So is there a way that scientists and the people that think that those kind of things are important can fund drug development and then make the products available to everybody? And you know, the state does some of that through, in fact, National Institutes of Health is sort of behind the creation of most of the HIV drugs, at least initially, before the companies got in on it. So there's a precedent for, you know, the state doing a pretty good job at something like that, and is there a way that we can do that without a state? And I think that's, you know, the kind of thing I'm sort of focusing on these days.
So in terms of personal experience, running up against kind of ugly reality, shall we say, how can I phrase this? I'll talk a wee bit about some of the organising I was involved in the UK. Kind of like Joey, I got involved in anarchism through kind of counterculture. In my case, it was punk rock, more or less, and had a similar kind of ethic. What Joey's talking about, the kind of horrible misnomer of DIY, which is, it's actually not doing it yourself, you're actually doing it in concert with others. So again, it's a horrible, these terrible misnomers. And I guess two of the tenets of anarchism is, one, I think organisation is crucial. And secondly, the other, which is I guess more of a tension than a tenet, is the problem, again, that Joey flagged, of power. How do we actually make shit happen? And it's undoubtedly the case that a small group of people, let's take Occupy for example, can do things which not only have incredible outward ripples, reverberations, but actually they're not the majority of people doing it. I mean, at its height, Occupy involved, I don't know, 0.1% of the population. Now, I'm not saying that is good or bad, that's just reality. So, the difference, I would argue, between anarchism and any other small sectarian cultic group who want to make an impact, for better or for worse, is that we actually have better politics. And the reason that we're doing it is because we want to improve, you know, we want a better life for everyone, not just for a particular group or sect or sector. Nevertheless, given that whatever political activism or community activism, whatever you want to do it, you're going to be involved in, one is going to be a tiny minority. Hence, how do you actually do that in practice? Again, as a side issue, that brings up all kinds of other issues about identity and community and who speaks for whom, and when one says I'm part of such and such community. But we'll put that aside just for a moment. Like, who speaks for the 99%, for example? Putting that aside, so a few of you may have heard, perhaps because you've heard me rambling on about it, but in the late 80s there was a tax called, I can't remember what it was called now, the community charge. It's called the community charge. It was basically, it was a tax which was levied on people to pay for local services. So what in effect, well, whatever. Heretofore, before the imposition of this tax, those local revenues, which pay for your garbage and your street lights and your policing and your libraries and whatever local stuff, it was before this tax, it was based on property. I.e., only property owners paid this tax. It's property tax. Mm-hmm. So as part of the kind of neoliberal 80s, which you had Reagan, we had Thatcher, and actually Thatcher invented it, and Reagan followed her. But as you all remember, or perhaps have heard about for those that didn't witness the glories of the 80s, it was basically an attack on the welfare state, on unions, on basically all forms of working class collective power, which had been kind of fought for and won for the previous 100 years. So the neoliberal project was to undo all of those gains which the working class had made, whatever. It took the form in America and in the UK with primarily a tax on, I say, working class forms of organisation. Typically that would mean the unions, which were beaten and assaulted and destroyed on both sides of the Atlantic, and also in those other gains. So in Britain it meant on the welfare state, on free healthcare, on free universal education for everyone, that kind of stuff. Free transportation, you name it, whatever. So the things that people had fought and died for, blah, 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 from the Haymarket Martyrs onward, were all being attacked. It had its culmination in the 80s in Britain because this was replacing what's called a progressive taxation, meaning only property owners pay, and you pay a percentage. The guy that lives in the castle pays more than the guy that lives in a small, modest bungalow, with a universal tax, meaning now everyone over 18, every adult has to pay the tax, including prisoners, except the Queen. The Queen was the only person that didn't have to pay. Again, it's a very kind of long setting it all up. So, for the previous 10 years before the poll tax come in, I've been involved in this loose grouping of anarchists, and we've been doing a bunch of kind of strike support and community work. We've been anti-racist organising, We did strike support stuff on wildcat strikes when they weren't supported by the unions. We did kind of picketing, community stuff. We did a bunch of anti-apartheid stuff in support of the township committees, blah, blah, blah. Part of the point being is I have 10 years of training of being a pretty good, what would now be called a political organizer, doing this kind of grassroots organizing. We were present enough, we being this loose grouping of 30 anarchists in Edinburgh, where I lived at the time, that when the poll tax was first mooted, we thought, aha, this is the big one. Because, of course, typical attacks happen on you attack students or welfare mothers or trade union members or ambulance drivers. So typically the attacks of neoliberalism have been picking off certain people. Because they'd already picked off most of them by then, they thought, all right, now we can roll out the big guns, which is this massive wealth redistribution going upwards with this flat rate tax. So everyone pays the same, whether or not you own property, whether or not you're a millionaire or a pauper in prison. So we thought, because we were very prescient, this is the big one. So we're going to stop all of our other organising, we're going to drop everything, all the strike support stuff, anti-apartheid stuff, blah, 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 and concentrate on this. This is the big one. We spent 2 years organising against it, to complete apathy. No one cared, no one came to our meetings. Again, we did the kind of typical boring organising. We rented the local church hall, we said, we're your neighbours, this tax has been mooted, it's going to come into effect in a year. Let's have a community forum about it, and like no one came. Literally. But we kind of doggedly soldiered on, and then when the tax actually came into being, people started getting these bills, then, so we had set up this structure. So I said there were about 30 of us. We divided Edinburgh into kind of the 9 main areas where we lived and set up these community groups in each area. So I lived in the south side of Edinburgh, so I was south side against the poll tax. We had these weekly meetings, we issued leaflets, we leafleted every door, 3,000 doors in our neighbourhood, etc., etc. So then when the bills started to drop, suddenly we get phone calls, suddenly we get people coming to meetings, suddenly a movement takes off. Initially, this movement is completely ignored by the rest of the left, because, as you guys are firmly aware, the left is typically obsessed with workers and workers' struggles, because we were organising explicitly on a community basis. We weren't involved in the unions or whatever. We were ignored or derided by the rest of the left. The ISO, for example, said that the anti-poll tax struggle was a bourgeois deviation from the class struggle, and initially instructed its members to pay the poll tax. Which they later reversed when, of course, it became a mass movement. So when shit goes down, suddenly people get involved. So then, as organisers, we start to have our first problems. So it's easy to organise when you're 30 comrades who more or less agree with each other and can do stuff, right? Suddenly you have this massive influx of the mythical person in the street who's previously apolitical, doesn't understand stuff, who might have all kinds of problems. They might have sexist language, they might be a bit racist, kind of normal, regular people. They have their problems, they may have mental health problems, whatever. So, how do we deal with this? Secondly, as the movement takes off, and I'll jump to the end and say Britain has 33 million adults. Our campaign was based on breaking the law, saying do not pay the poll tax. We will support you, and we will ensure that nothing bad happens to you if you do not pay the poll tax. So the poll tax was defeated by 18 million people, meaning more than 50% of the adult population of Britain never ever paid the poll tax. That's mass disobedience, call it what you want. So we did that by supporting people. The way that, again, without getting too many arcane details, the way that the state and local authorities could make you pay the poll tax was either by garnishing your wages or by sending in the sheriffs to seize your luxury items. So by a quirk of the law, you couldn't go to prison for non-payment. It wasn't a criminal offence, it was a civil offence, because it was a local tax. So they'd send in the sheriffs, and the same way they send in your sheriffs to evict you if you don't pay your rent, or send in the sheriffs to turn off electricity if you don't pay your bills, they'd send in the sheriffs to, quote, do a warrant sale, which meant they were allowed to seize your luxury goods. In those days, your video recorder, your television, your stereo, and they would do what was called a warrant sale. They would auction off your luxury goods. So what we said is, don't pay the poll tax. When the sheriffs come, we will physically defend you. So by law, like here, they're going to evict you. You get a 30-day notice, right? You get it tacked on your door. So when you get the eviction note or the warrant sale notice, when the sheriffs would turn up, there'd be a big street party, there'd be banners outside the window saying fuck poll tax, there'd be people with brass banners playing in the street. Typically the sheriffs would turn around and walk away.